Association, our session takes up what is surely about to become a major focus in the work of historians, the nature and impact of climate change on a newly globalizing, and I suppose from the perspective of climate change, already globalized world, together with the role and accelerating scope of human agency in promoting it. It does so, however, from a rather novel perspective of the meaning of this change and the theories adduced to explain it for historical thought and writing itself. For if human activity lies at the root of this development, then historiography must take account of and explain its character. But can it, within the framework of the paradigms that continue to govern our current historiography, indebted as they are to causal explanatory modes that still lie at the heart of our professional methodologies, post-structuralism notwithstanding. So that's the problematic that our session will broach today, although clear directions and ways to address it would appear to lie somewhat on a distant horizon. Our principal speaker this afternoon is Dipesh Chakrabarty, Lawrence A. Distinguished Service Professor in the Department of History and Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations at the University of Chicago. Professor Chakrabarty received his PhD from the Australian National University in 1984 and taught at the University of Melbourne and the Australian National University before joining Chicago in 1995. He's the author of 3 major monographs in English, Rethinking Working Class History, Bengal, 1890-1940, published in 1989, Habitations of Modernity, Essays in the Wake of Subaltern Studies, 2002, and Provincializing Europe, Post-Colonial Thought and Historical Difference, published in 2007, as well as some 133 articles in English, not to mention an additional 30 or so in Bengali. Although still in mid-career, he's been awarded honorary degrees at the University of London and the University of Antwerp. He's an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and an honorary fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities and an honorary professorial fellow of the School of Historical Studies at the University of Melbourne. He's also been a fellow at the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin, as well as a distinguished visiting fellow and professor at a variety of institutions far too numerous to name. He has 3 additional books in preparation, one of which takes up the question that is the subject of today's lecture: why global climate change changes history. Professor Chakrabarty.
Thank you. I'm actually very honored to be invited to present at this opening session of the AHA. Just as I was sitting there, Gaby was asking me what got me into climate change, and got me into climate change autobiographically was my involvement with Australia and the Australian drought, which has now been replaced by Australian floods. And in between those Australian fires, intellectually thinking that this is really one of the most probably major changes in human history happening. And while philosophers, economists, and political scientists and other humanists have had things to say about it, including novelists like the novel Solar, historians have been relatively slow to respond to the present crisis, which is not to say that historians have not written about climate. Leroy Naduri wrote about climate a long time ago. Wolfgang Behringer has come out with climate-sensitive history of the Little Ice Age, and William McNeill has written about it. So it's not, my point is not that historians haven't responded at all, or haven't written about climate. There are French scholars working on it. But there are already emerging debates about how historians might respond to this crisis, and I suppose in that debate I take a particular position, a version of which came out last year in my first stab at this problem, where I put my thoughts in the form of 4 theses in an essay called The Climate of History, 4 theses, that was published in Critical Inquiry in 2009. And what I'm presenting is really following on from some of the thoughts presented in that essay. Fundamentally, I will discuss 2 challenges that I think the science of climate change poses to us humanist historians. One of those, both of those challenges follow from the proposition that the scientists are making, and they've been making this in a way for the last 50 years, though 2007 was when IPCC came out with its report in the most dramatic way. But the point that they've been making is that for the first time in human history, human beings collectively have become climate makers. Is that the climate change is anthropogenic, it's human-induced, and it's really from this proposition that this climate change is not entirely natural climate change, which I argued then kind of breaks down the wall that has existed for at least 300 years between human history and natural history. That's been particularly become stronger in the last 50 years or so. And it's out of that bringing together of natural history and human history that at least two challenges ensue, but they want to think of more. One is the question of scale of human history. Now here again I need to clarify what I mean by scale. Scale is not just the difference between taking a huge chunk of time and a very small element of time and contrasting them. So in some ways, if you read Ricoeur's book on history, memory, forgetting, and in the discussion in the chapter on explanation and understanding, you will see that he thinks of Brodel as dealing with large scale, and Carlo Ginzburg as dealing with small scale. And here, but scale actually also should involve the question of the unit of measurement of time. Because you can actually study a large-scale phenomenon and a small-scale phenomenon applying the same unit of time. Whereas what's interesting in the present conjuncture, if human beings, as scientists are saying, if human beings have become a geological agent, then given that geological events happen over a much larger units of time, rather than compared to events in human history, then what you have are two different kind of units of time that one needs to think through together. So I'll be making an argument for what I call multiscalar history. But what is interesting, a problem of thought in thinking about multiscalar history, is that one is trying to bring together, think together, a series of events that actually happen on different units of time. So that the immiscibility of these units, or how you convert one scale to another, is a problem that I raise here. Out of this, I think the second question that arises also is a question about human agency. Now, historians are not normally philosophers, and of course, usually philosophical talk send us to sleep, but historians are sometimes closet philosophers about human beings. In that, because particularly as Ricoeur says, that when you think of human experience, it's very hard to avoid assumptions about how humans perceive the world. And because you get close to an individual when you talk about experience,